Hi, I'm Dan Faggella, and you're listening to the Visible Expert Podcast.
My name is Rondalyn Korlak.
Hi, this is Scott Brinker.
I'm Michael Brenner.
Hi, this is Scott McCain.
What's up, peeps? My name is Keenan.
Hello, this is Anthony Fasano from the Engineering Management Institute.
My name is Rachel Fish.
Hi, I'm Dr. Tracy Fenara.
And you are listening to the Visible Experts.
Visible Expert
Podcast.
Welcome to the Visible Expert Podcast. I'm John Tyerman.
And I'm Kelly Waffle.
And today our guest is Daniel Faggella. He's the CEO, founder, and head of research at Emerj. And we talk a lot about artificial intelligence. So Kelly, what did you take away from our talk with Daniel?
I found it really interesting on a couple of fronts. One is really around him addressing the need to have strategy when you do AI, that a lot of folks go into it with kind of a scattershot approach. And he said, you'll get people that have spent all this money on AI and then realize, it's failing and I need help. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was good when he talks about, executives, when they're considering AI, need to start out with an understanding of AI and what it can do. And then they need to understand the range of what AI can do in their particular sector. And then they need kind of more of a long-range set of goals, 3 to 5 years out of implementation and then letting that play out and what it can do. But if you don't have all those things in place, you're going to fail with AI. Mm-hmm. What did you learn from Daniel?
Well, I loved his practical examples that he gave for professional services firms, for government contractors, for law firms. So I thought that was something that I think our listeners will be able to take away, kind of to your point, a clearer picture about what AI can do and how it can help these businesses. Because a lot of people, maybe they have a misconception about AI and that it's something that you can plug in and have immediate success with. But to your point, you got to think a little bit longer than that. So I think he does a good job of illustrating the benefits and some of the caveats of artificial intelligence. And then he knows which city is happier between New York and Chicago. So I thought that was pretty cool too.
And that's a question I've been trying to get answered for years. So I'm glad he could figure that out for us.
We finally settled the score.
Exactly.
So, all right. Well, let's spare no other time. I think let's just jump right into our interview with Daniel. Here he comes.
Our guest today is Daniel Faggella, CEO, founder, and head of research at Emerj. An accomplished speaker, Daniel helps leaders in finance, government, and global industries trust Emerj to cut through the artificial intelligence hype, leverage proven best practices, and make data-backed decisions about mission-critical priorities. Daniel, welcome to the Visible Expert Podcast.
Hey, glad to be here, folks.
Daniel, here at Hinge, we define recognized influencers who share their expertise and experience in the B2B and professional services spaces as visible experts. And this podcast is focused on sharing the stories of our guests and illuminating the challenges and rewards of building a personal brand. Can you touch a little bit about your journey, about how you came to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. It's a little bit of a winding path to get to where I am in terms of market research and AI. You could think about us kind of like a very boutique Gartner or Forrester, but we're focused explicitly on the return on investment of artificial intelligence in the enterprise. So market research and advisory. Most people that start such a company would spin out of an existing firm. Maybe they work at IDC, they work at Forrester, they decide to step out on their own. My coming around to AI was actually pretty strange. So I was, if we were doing this video or interview by video, you'd actually be able to see my ears. I've got some pretty bad cauliflower ear from training mixed martial arts. So the way that I paid my way through undergrad and then through Ivy League graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania was actually training fighters. So kind of a weird backstory there. And when I went to University of Pennsylvania, I went for skill development and skill acquisition. So I wanted to understand the cognitive and the neuroscience of skill development kind of at a master's degree level at a really, really good school. And so I went to went to Penn to do the Ivy League thing. And by the time I graduated, I was learning a lot about the models of how humans come to learn, how people can learn faster to perform in sport, faster to perform in memorization tasks, and really understanding some of the underlying science there. But I was also getting tapped on the shoulder by the computer science folks at UPenn, and this is back in 2011. They were saying, hey, you're learning all this human learning stuff. You should really check out this machine learning. And this is, again, back in 2011, doing a little bit of natural language processing on some Twitter data to figure out if New York is happier or sadder than Chicago today was like a really big deal. But some of that early work was being done on language and on vision. And by the time I graduated, I had spent enough time looking at some of this stuff to say, this is going to be positively transformative to everything. Every single industry is just going to be radically shifted by this. And so I decided I'd take my cognitive science learning and I would start just interviewing absolutely as many researchers and business folks in the artificial intelligence space as I could. And back in 2012, nobody really cared about that, but I sure as heck did. So basically, the market research business started after about 2 long years of grinding out interviews with researchers at Brown University and Duke University and all kinds of companies across Silicon Valley, figuring out where this stuff was making a business impact. And it was through that raw experience that we developed our first few reports and got our first few clients to turn this into a company. So a little bit of a disjointed path, but that's how I got into it.
So which city is happier, New York or Chicago?
Oh man, I don't remember at all. I'm going to guess New York is a little bit happier though. Chicago's
Really?
awful cold for my liking. Yeah. I don't remember the date exactly, but that would be my default assumption. But yeah, that's basically the story. Now, of course, today, I mean, we're called upon to speak at United Nations headquarters about, deep fakes and artificial intelligence by some of the largest banks and insurance companies in the United States when they're deciding on what vendor companies to work with or what kind of AI strategy to roll out. But that really didn't start with a computer science degree. It didn't start with market research. It started by understanding ground up, where is this hitting the business world? Where is it struggling? Where is it succeeding? And what are the things business leaders need to know to unlock the actual financial ROI? So that boots on the ground work was what kind of got us in the door to, client number 1 all the way up to United Nations headquarters.
Well, that's great. That's a perfect setup for my next question here, Daniel. How can AI make the world a better place? And secondly, where should businesses start to set up a strategy?
Yeah, so two pretty big picture questions here. In terms of, I'll touch on strategy first. The second one is even more open-ended. So in terms of strategy, I think you're bringing up a great question because we often really do have to start with strategy. One of the big mistakes of applying artificial intelligence in the enterprise is kind of going in scattershot and kind of plugging in AI, treating it like it's IT. Hey, let's plug in a little AI over here. Let's plug in a little AI over there. Let's go plug in a little chatbot, see if we can have it engage with the customers and save some money or something. As it turns out, it really doesn't work that way. I wish I could say that when we get called upon for market research work, it's when companies are getting into their first project, but it's often after they're $2 million into a whole bunch of pilot projects that are failing and flopping in different corners of the business when they decide, geez, we should have had an orchestrated strategy. So the importance here of what you just mentioned is that we really do need to think strategically about what parts of the business do we want to overhaul first, because we can't just jack this into our existing systems. We often have to overhaul the way we're storing data. We have to overhaul the way our data scientists are working with our subject matter experts. We might have to hire a whole new bunch of data scientists to begin to work with the certain data and the certain business processes within a given division or department before we can figure out realistically, is there value to be wrought here or not? So how to get started with that is really, in our opinion, needs to begin with executive education, needs to begin with executives who have really 2 things in their minds. One of those is a strong understanding of what artificial intelligence can do, sort of what are the capabilities of AI. And the second is to have a strong understanding of the range of AI use cases in their sector. So if they work in banking, for example, we do a tremendous amount of work in commercial and retail banking with large companies. If leadership only knows about chatbots and then otherwise AI is just a buzzword, we are not in a position to start building out a robust strategy. We need executives who understand, at a very tertiary level, not technical, What can AI do in compliance, in fraud, in customer service, in back-end processing and data entry, et cetera, and get a good understanding of the rounded range of use cases so that they can say with their executive knowledge, okay, here's what I think actually aligns to our longer term transformation vision as a company. Here's what actually aligns to our 3 to 5 year goals. Executives are really good at thinking in those terms, but they need to marry those with what AI can do conceptually and with the range of functional use cases within an industry. And really that's where a lot of our work centers in. But without that, getting started on a strategy is not going to be possible. Happy to get into the second question as well, but let me know if you want me to go deeper into that first one.
No, let's jump into the second one. I'm curious about this one.
Yeah, so in terms of where AI can make the world a better place, I presume you pull that from the TEDx talk of the same title that I gave
Indeed.
at University of Cal Poly down in San Luis Obispo.
Yes.
Anybody who wants to watch that talk, just how to make AI a better place, pretty easy to type it into YouTube. If you did watch that presentation, which you may or may not have, that actually goes into really far out, wild territory in terms of the long-term ethical consequences of super intelligent machines 20 or 30 years from now. That's probably not what your listeners right now want to listen to, but if they're interested in that, they can listen to that episode. In terms of the near term, where can AI make the world a better place? I think this is, there's maybe two sides of the coin we can look at. One would be the potential humanitarian implications and applications. So this could be everything from sort of optimizing an energy grid to make sure we can more effectively serve more people in our populace while creating less waste, all the way to translation. A country like India has, dozens and dozens of languages, and it's really hard for all the children of those different languages or people to get the kind of education they need, or even to get the right kind of news from the government about what they need to do. If there's a landslide that might be a high risk, or if there's some change in some law, there's a lot of value in simply being able to do translation. So kind of think about anything a government is trying to do to help its people now, being able to enhance and augment that with AI, I think is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is, I think, the economic potential that can be wrought from the technology itself. Since the digital age and the rise of China, and to some degree the rise of India, we've had a lot of people pull their way out of the absolute dredges of poverty, the very bottom tier of poverty. And I think that AI starts to add more business value in every given sector. It'll probably make a lot more tools available for small business in the coming, let's say, 5 years out as the technologies develop. I think we'll be able to do more of what we call progress at a global societal level. So kind of there's the government side of things, and then there's also just the big picture of hopefully making the world a more prosperous place in the first place.
That's great.
So Daniel, you kind of touched on this and alluded to it a little bit in your last answer, but can you give us some practical examples of how businesses and industries like professional services, finance, legal, and government contracting can leverage artificial intelligence?
Yeah, there's certainly some industries that are moving faster than others. So government contracting would depend on what you're doing. There's a lot of different directions we could go there. We actually do a good deal of work in defense. My call after this phone call today is actually with one of the divisions of the DoD. I will name them not, but spoken at National Defense University, spoken at United Nations counterterrorism events, et cetera. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in defense. It's a big bucket. Let's talk about finance. Most of our work is in finance. A lot of the very explainable use cases are in finance. I think your question was just what are some useful examples of where AI is delivering value? Is that the right way to sum it up and go forward here?
Sure, yeah. How are they delivering value, or what does that look like in a professional services context?
For a small, let's say a 10-person professional services firm, we're really not in any meaningful way going to be deploying AI powerfully. It's just simply not going to be the case. Right now, artificial intelligence in terms of actual innovation is happening at an enterprise level. Now, 5 years from now, I suspect that'll change. But right now, the technology really does require data scientists. It requires tremendous data volumes, and it requires really fat R&D budgets and a good stomach for R&D to be able to figure out where the value comes out of these applications, because many of them are nascent. However, if we talk about finance, which you listed, we'll talk about a couple potential use cases there. The attention, the glitter and the glamour is all about chatbots. Most of them are absolute and utter failures. Areas that are delivering value in banking and financial services today are a lot of the time around anomaly detection. I'll use an example of fraud. So if we look at payment fraud for credit cards and for banks, by being able to detect fraudulent payments and being able to train machine learning systems on the common factors that different fraudulent payments have. So let's say, we have a company like a Capital One that sees, billions of transactions, every given month or what have you. Capital One can find all the fraudulent transactions, and they can figure out what are the sort of underpinning factors that those fraudulent transactions had in common. And they can use that to better detect and inform what is fraud and what is not. So if something isn't fraud, their customers can just go ahead and purchase something. I'm sure both of you have been traveling somewhere across state lines or in Europe, and you try to use your credit card and it fails and you have to call the company or whatever. Nobody likes doing that. Super annoying. So which transactions are real fraud? Of course, we do want those turned down, but which are unlikely to be fraud, and we should let them go ahead and go through. Maybe we'll investigate them a little bit, but we should go ahead and let them go through. Fraud is a nice anomaly detection use case. It's also quite measurable. And that's one potential example in the financial services space. Another application in financial services that stretches over into other domains of professional services, such as legal, which you brought up, is in document search and discovery. So I'll give you one example of document search and discovery that's extremely popular right now. GDPR, which is this a new set of data rules kind of started by the EU here, is changing sort of some of the risk profile of different contracts, different agreements with different companies and the people that they work with. Software firms, professional services firms, whatever. People are now having to say, how does this new set of rules actually change or alter how we need to do business, how we need to bill this client, what we're able to do with this client or not do with this client. So artificial intelligence can help us take a look at the kinds of clauses, the kinds of legal language, the kinds of services or terms within our contracts that we now think deserve more scrutiny. And instead of having somebody go in and manually read through 10,000 or 100,000 or a million, various and sundry contracts to understand their new risk profile, we can have human beings go through and manually label, dozens or maybe hundreds of similar legal clauses or similar types of services within those contracts, and then instruct a machine learning system to be trained on those and to say, hey, flag for me with a little yellow flag all the documents that have clauses like this one. And then we can go in and investigate only the ones that really merit our attention. So instead of having to pay, a team of 500 people to, in the Philippines to comb through all of our documents, we can just see the ones that have a 90% or higher likelihood of requiring an edit and have people only look through those. So that's only one of many applications of document search and discovery. But anywhere where we're dealing with a ton of paper, a ton of forms, a ton of, legal documentation in some way, shape, or form, AI is going to come in handy in the years ahead.
Let's change gears a little bit here, Daniel. Looking back, what skills or personal habits have helped your visible expertise success?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the sort of happy-go-lucky consequences of having a market research firm is being able to interview a lot of people. We actually have a podcast called the AI in Business podcast, where we have on people like, let's say, the head of AI at Raytheon or the head of AI at HSBC or these giant companies, and get to learn directly from them. I think a habit that served me well has been to tune into what the commonalities are of those folks and to double down on those themes. So some 3 or 4 years ago, I recall really hearing a lot from the companies that were moving forward with AI in the enterprise, companies like an AT&T or a Comcast, or we were talking to Capital One at the time. And we were hearing a lot about cultural challenges to deploying AI. What kind of ways of making decisions, what ways of executive thinking were ultimately bigger barriers than even some of the technical stuff. So picking up on a little bit of that theme and then doubling down on that with more interviews and more research products to serve our enterprise clients, I think was super helpful. Same thing when we went into financial services for the first time, really in depth about 2.5 years ago. We picked up on threads around compliance and really the eminent importance of compliance in terms of the priorities of banking leadership and the people that were signing checks, and really doubling down on those kinds of applications because it's what people wanted. So I think tuning into who's ultimately your customer here, tuning into, if you talk to a whole bunch of them, what do they have in common that's kind of that underpinning thread that really you could double down on, and then doing just that. And I think for us, in terms of building an audience and being able to have the opportunities we've had to work with, the the World Bank and the OECD and some of these big enterprises, I think it's been in large part due to finding those threads.
So you mentioned some of the cultural challenges of implementing AI. What are some of those cultural challenges? Is it more of like a lack of understanding of the technology, or is it a fear that AI will come in and replace jobs? What are some of those cultural challenges?
Yeah, those are both great examples of potential cultural challenges, and those both deserve somewhere on the hierarchy list here. But if we think overall about some of the biggest cultural challenges across sectors, so looking not just in one industry, but across industries, one of the big hurdles is understanding the prerequisites to deployment. So if executives think of AI as if it's like IT, okay, it's like software. We determine how to configure it, we hook up the APIs, and then we just start using it, and it does whatever we want. That sort of mindset of thinking about AI like IT is extremely counterproductive, because with AI, we need to hook into streams of data. We need to train and iterate and experiment on that data to see if there's even value to be found. And sometimes there isn't, by the way. We might spend 4 or 5 months working on something and it doesn't necessarily produce a return. Now, that doesn't mean we should avoid AI, but it does mean we should be very careful about where we decide to apply it first, because we can waste a lot of money basing things on assumptions, because we're not talking plug and play here. We're talking about experimentation. So one of the cultural things is understanding that AI is really, in many regards, is R&D. In many regards, it's changing the core way that we work. So culturally right now, today, AI is thought of as IT. Sometimes it's thought about as IT for automation or for efficiency. Those are very low resolution views of artificial intelligence, and they're often responsible for a lot of wasted money. So that conception, I think, is one big kind of cultural hurdle. And then another, which you brought up, is an understanding of the technology itself. I'll tell you one thing, folks. If we want to cut down on how many hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars an enterprise wastes on artificial intelligence projects, on flimsy pitches from AI vendors, some of whom are good, some of whom are garbage, one easy filter here is to have executives who have a realistic understanding, not a technical understanding, but a realistic conceptual understanding of what can AI do and what can't it do. How basically does AI function? How does a machine learning system take into account data, produce an output that allows us to have a more, fruitful process in our business? Understanding a couple use cases and how that works conceptually will develop what we would refer to as kind of a BS-ometer, so that they could detect when they're hearing a pitch or they're hearing some kind of plausible application for AI. Is this something that's even realistic? Without having that, we're going to blow a lot of money on what sounds great and whoever makes the biggest promise. And that's still where we are in the enterprise today, as people will waste money 5 times before they decide they really need to educate themselves. But this is a place where they should be educating themselves now, and that's a cultural shift.
Well, if you ever patent that BS-ometer, I'd be interested in buying one for myself.
Yeah.
Hey, Daniel, looking back through your journey as you've built up an audience, as you've done your podcast and built your business, who were some of the people that have influenced you, and how did they impact you along the way?
Yeah, I've had a couple folks that have really helped me a lot. 2 of them I would refer to as kind of technical advisors. So one of our technical advisors is a fellow by the name of Marco. He runs machine learning at a company called HubSpot here in Boston, which is one of our rare, unicorn billion-dollar firms in the Boston area. Incredibly intelligent academic fella. And while I've never really learned to code outside of like some very basic fundamental understanding of Python, just to have the conceptual grounding, but not really to be able to build anything productive, while I don't have that technical background, he really has it in spades. And so when I was very early on learning conceptually how AI was working and where it was finding its way into business, I was able to ask him questions at a bit of a deeper level of what's realistic and what's not from a technical standpoint. What could this natural language processing application realistically expect to achieve within X? How much data do you think we'd need to get to goal Y? And getting that grounding from someone who with a postdoc level of hard science knowledge and experience with AI, I think gave me a bit of an edge as opposed to even just talking to the leaders I was talking to. So Marco is a really big influence for me. And then we've had a number of research advisors over the years who I think also have been extremely helpful. One of whom was a a previous head of AI at HSBC. I mean, outside of China, HSBC is the biggest bank in the world in terms of assets under management. And this fella just really went above and beyond in terms of interviews and context and reading through our research and providing layered feedback and kind of giving a C-suite perspective and giving a boots on the ground perspective from his experience and having a lot of those iterations of feedback when we first got into the financial services space from someone with such a rare degree of experience, I think allowed us to convey our expertise in a way that was genuinely useful for customers in a big way. So both on the business side and the technical side, I've had folks that I think have stepped our game up at Emerj kind of twofold and who've really, given a lot of themselves to make what we do better. And mentor-wise, that's about as good as it gets.
Daniel, you had mentioned your AI and business podcast, and I see that it's had over 2 million downloads. Can you tell us about your show and your experience using podcasts to build an audience?
Sure. Yeah, happy to do so. So yeah, as you mentioned, the show's been around for quite some time. I think you'll see episodes on that show going back all the way to 2012. So really, really, really long time running that show. If when we walk into an insurance firm, we do get to say something like, of the other companies who can tell you they're doing market research, how many of them have been talking to insurance AI leaders for the last 8 years? And the answer is often, well, none of them. So we have a great breadth of experience there. In terms of building an audience and building kind of a presence for expertise, I'll tell you some of the things that we learned there too. Very early on, I started using the podcast to get people to subscribe to our newsletter. So we would sort of tell people to go over to our website. It was a slightly different website when we started, but go to emerj.com. That's EMERJ.com. Sign up for the newsletter there. And when they were there, in the first, let's say, 3 to 4 years of building the podcast, we had a survey that would kick out on the 11th day of them joining the newsletter that would essentially ask them all about the topics they were interested in, all about their own professional goals, and all about what they wanted to hear more of on the show. And we really learned from that feedback, and again, this is years ago, from that feedback, that it was hard examples and use cases that were really valuable for people, and it was practical advice for deploying AI and measuring AI ROI that was useful for people. Mm-hmm. So our audience, which is kind of innovation and strategy leaders at big enterprises, those folks just told us what the heck they wanted. They got some time to read some newsletters, to get engaged with our brand. And then we hit them with a survey and kind of asked them to give of themselves a little bit to help us improve. And by kind of by using the podcast to build an email list, that was helpful. But by polling them early on and getting a sense of what the heck mattered to them, allowed us to double down on those themes and go from, in the early days, 200 downloads a month back in 2012 to now well over 2 million lifetime downloads on the podcast. So yeah, that's been one of the big tools for us, I'd say, over the years.
That's great to know. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
Very good. And Daniel, I know we're running light on time here, but I've got just one burning question that I want to ask you. So
okay, let's hit it.
You mentioned earlier that you're big into martial arts and MMA and even Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And I'm curious, sure. Have you been able to keep up with these fitness activities during this time?
Oh, man, I really haven't. I sold my gym back in 2013 or so. Once I had an e-commerce company to fund my market research stuff, I kind of sold that business. Got my black belt, competed for many years. But yeah, to be honest, I haven't really stayed on top of martial arts. I got a life purpose now. I really want to be involved in the global governance of AI. And I think the long-term consequences 20, 30 years from now are going to be so gargantuan that just eats up 100 hours of my week. And I don't have much left. So I have a couple friends that still run mixed martial arts gyms, one really close friend in Austin, Texas, one friend in my home state of Rhode Island. Whenever I visit them, I'll try to roll around a little bit and have some fun and train with some of their students and, teach a little mini seminar, to entertain some folks. But yeah, in general, I have not been able to keep up with martial arts between all the flying to Geneva and everywhere else for the AI world. They just have not intersected very well.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for coming onto our show. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. If folks wanted to learn more about you, where should they go?
Yeah, I'd say, folks can find us at just emerj.com, but I think probably most of the audience here, if they're interested in figuring out where AI fits into their own business or maybe their clients' businesses if they serve clients, we have a short report called 3 Ways to Discover AI Trends, which is just emerj.com/T3. That's T as in trends and then the number 3. If people go there, they can grab that short PDF. I think if people are looking for ideas, sort of, what could apply to us, what could apply to our clients, that's probably the best succinct resource. And otherwise, they can find me on Twitter and say hi. Tell me they heard about me on the Visible Expert podcast.
Awesome. And what's your Twitter handle?
It's just at Dan Faggella. So DanFaggella.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on our show. It's been a pleasure.
I've really
Awesome.
enjoyed it.
Glad to be here.
Thank you, Dan.
Yes, indeed.
If you found this interview interesting and want to learn more, go to hingemarketing.com and please give us a rating and a review. And if you know of any research teams in Antarctica, tell them to tune in to the Visible Expert podcast. Thanks for listening.